Good evening and welcome, everybody. My name is Trey Grayson. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics, and I want to welcome everybody tonight to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Harvard Kennedy School for tonight's panel discussion. We've got a great crowd. We have a great set of speakers on stage, and at the appropriate time, we'll invite you to engage with them in this conversation about the 2012 presidential race. I want to begin with introductions of the panelists, starting to my immediate left. Karen Tumulty is a national political correspondent with the Washington Post, where she joined last year. It's been there almost 2 years. Prior to that was with Time Magazine, and would like to point out that she's a Harvard Business School graduate, so we're glad to have her back on campus. Next is Mark McKinnon. Mark is spending this semester here with us at the Kennedy School as a Shorenstein Fellow. He has a veteran of countless political campaigns and was a senior advisor to President Bush's campaigns for presidency in 2000 and 2004. To his left, Khalil Bird. Khalil is the CEO of Americans Elect. When you leave here today, you will know what they are all about. Khalil is a Kennedy School graduate and was one of the very first volunteers, I guess is probably the best. You probably didn't get paid at the beginning, did you?
Oh, we got paid.
You got paid? One of the very first staffers of this long-shot gubernatorial candidate named Deval Patrick, who jumped in the Massachusetts governor's race in the 2006 cycle, and he won. And so Governor Patrick appointed Khalil to his administration to serve as, in the personnel department and appointments and things like that. And then on the left, appropriately enough, is Institute of Politics fellow Tad Devine. Tad is a Democratic media consultant, senior strategist on several presidential campaigns, and also very experienced with independent campaigns, having worked on 2 independent campaigns for governor last year, and for many years has worked with independent, or at least socialist, non-Republican, non-Democratic member of the United States Senate from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. So great panel. Please join me in welcoming all of them to the stage. I thought we'd begin tonight with Karen. She's been traveling the country, covering the presidential race, talking to voters, observing candidates' interactions. What are you hearing out there? And as maybe specifically to help us transition to the topic at hand, what about this whole dissatisfaction with both political parties we see in polling both of Congress and as well as the candidates?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. And as you said, I'm a graduate of the business school. And so there were many, many evenings when I found myself coming across the river to events like this. And I never imagined that I would be on this side of it. And I may be hallucinating this, but I believe the first event that I came to over here to see somebody speak was a candidate named John Anderson. So that tells you both how old I am and how long this issue has been around, sort of. What you see, and especially if these days, if you're in states like Florida and Nevada, is just the most toxic, I think, political climate out there. But it's not toxic in sort of the way we've come to think of it, the sort of partisan toxic, but just sort of people feeling just really uncertain about the future. It's in part, I think, just sort of what they see in their lives, that people have lost confidence not only in the system, but in their own futures. And more important, I think, than any political poll that people are looking at these days is to look at the consumer confidence indexes, which there are 2 of them, and they began keeping them in the early 1950s. And if you look how low they have gotten, there are only 2 presidential election years since the early 1950s that they have been as low as they are at this moment. And those 2 presidential election years were 1980 and 1992, which also happened to be the only 2 presidential election years in that time when elected incumbent presidents were thrown out of office. And I think that, if I were in the Obama White House right now, that number would be worrying me more than any other. And the other thing I think that has happened is just the volatility of the political climate. In 1994, it had been 40 years since the leadership of the House of Representatives had changed hands. In the last 3 elections, 06, 08, 10, somebody got kicked to the curb. And I think what that suggests is that the voters are not only upset with what is going on in Washington, but they're not very patient with what is going on in Washington anymore. And you know, finally, on the issue at hand tonight, I've been sort of struggling with this myself, trying to figure out what exactly, and Tad's seen this so long from the inside, what exactly is the role of a political party these days? Because it feels like the center of gravity in politics has shifted away from them. The money is being raised elsewhere. The message is being shaped outside the party. This started some with McCain-Feingold, but it has certainly accelerated since Citizens United. And also since elected officials have become less tethered to party labels and more tethered to ideological labels. The most conservative Democrat in the House of Representatives is now to the left of the most liberal Republican, and that certainly was not something that we saw for most of our history.
You picked up on the word labels. Mark McKinnon is one of the founders of No Labels. I left that part out of his biography, and that's actually where Mark and I first came into contact with each other. Mark, you've been around in a lot of presidential campaigns, and you've been talking a lot here at the Kennedy School since you became a Shorenstein Fellow, and also in your work as a national commentator about this political scene. What's so striking about it, and what's your take on it?
Well, it's profound, and let me just jump off on some of the points that Karen made. We are truly in uncharted waters. We conveniently want to always find historic parallels, and because it's an easy way to develop a narrative and set a context for what we're looking at. And so Karen mentioned the 1992 consumer confidence number, and that's an election we commonly refer to. We say, oh, and when were things this bad before? And we say, oh, well, 1992, and that was the race in which a very significant third-party candidacy arose, and if not for some issues, could arguably have won that election. And in fact, Ross Perot led that race for a significant period of time, was beating Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. But I decided to go back and look at the actual numbers from 1992 to just see how much of a parallel there was. And the reality is that it's not even close. It's a lot worse. I mean, exponentially worse. So in 1992, the Gallup survey, which asked sort of a general, do you trust government, or are you concerned about government? Back then, the disapproval of government was 54, and the approval was 37. Bad, right? Today, it's 81% disapprove and 11% approve. So that's a swing of 45 net points worse than what it was before. And I also I'm glad you mentioned the Consumer Confidence Index, because that's another one of those barometers that we look at. It's sort of the conventional wisdom. And the interesting thing about American politics is that conventional wisdom often gets thrown out the window. And I think that's particularly going to happen when it's as volatile as it is right now. But the average consumer confidence number for when a president runs and is reelected is 95. The average number when a president runs and loses is 76. The number today is 55. So think about that. President Obama, if history holds up, President Obama would have to improve the Consumer Confidence Index by 20 points just to lose. Okay? So that's how significant it is. And so I think that in this kind of environment, first of all, people, their confidence in the parties has evaporated, their confidence in institutions has evaporated, and it's fascinating. There are a lot, we could talk for an hour about why that's happened. A lot of it had to do with the debt ceiling debate. But basically, people look at Washington and say, this isn't working. The system's completely paralyzed by hyperpartisanship. And interestingly, we had sort of a wave change election in 08, sweeping in Democrats. We had a wave election in 10, sweeping in the Republicans. And in both instances, I think voters say, well, We voted for change and nothing happened in either case. So that's why I think people always say about a third party when we bring this up, oh, it's not going to happen, A, because it hasn't happened before, and B, because of ballot access. I can give you 100 reasons why it hasn't happened, but that's all pattern recognition. It's the same exact things I heard 5 or 6 years ago about why we never elect an African-American president. Just because it hasn't happened in American politics doesn't mean it won't now. And the conditions now are more fertile than they've ever been for something significantly disruptive to happen. And Khalil's going to talk to you about something significant that is happening, and it's an opportunity that's a very well thought out idea that is brilliant because it doesn't have a candidate, it's creating a platform so that anybody could go out there and run under this Americans banner elect. Now think about that for just a second. Think of all the people in American politics who are either in office, who are out of office, or in the private sector who think they ought to be president, okay, and tell them they don't have to go through the primaries, they don't have to pay for the ballot access, all you got to do is get nominated to run. I think some interesting people are going to show up, and it's going to get very interesting. And by the way, at that point, the press is going to be completely bored with the Romney-Obama story or the Romney-Perry or whatever it is. You know, that's going to be an old story by about March. The press hates a static storyline. They love conflict. And they're going to look around and say, oh, what's this Americans Elect deal? So, Khalil, what is this Americans Elect deal?
You know, thank you, Mark and Karen. The people who taught me about national politics, because I wasn't in politics until my mid-30s, were those who had come off the 2000 race with President Bush and then Vice President Gore. And I assure you that they were deeply scarred. But one of the things they knew, my classmates who I was here with in 2002, was how to run a conventional primary race on the Democratic and Republican side. They knew when, plus or minus, all the primaries would start. They knew how to sequence things in terms of the money, in terms of where to put resources in those early primary states. They understood television buys and media buys. But if I polled those folks who worked in significant positions in those campaigns at that particular time and asked them if they had a really deep understanding about how to run a presidential campaign now based on what they knew then, they would probably fall short. And not in terms of their intelligence or ability, but because everything has changed in terms of how we use new media, in terms of the way people interact with candidates. And nothing proves it more than the race that we're watching on the Republican side, where people have gone from being a governor that people vaguely know to all of a sudden being at the top of the charts for a couple of weeks. Americans Elect is focusing on this particular problem in a very specific way. We are getting on the ballot as an organization in all 50 states, a very difficult and expensive exercise of $15 million and thousands of signature gathers. At this point, 1.9 million people have signed Americans Elect petitions across the country in states like California, Michigan, Ohio, Florida, all those familiar states. And we are also holding the first ever convention for president where any American voter can nominate someone, or any person who feels that they have the ability and the talent can step forward. And one of the things that we emphasize is this is happening now. We opened our website up 3 months ago. And many of you may have seen an article by Tom Friedman, who basically argued in the New York Times that politics is the last and next place where technology will flatten things. It's happened in entertainment industry, it's happened in books and publishing and everywhere, but in politics, what technology has been used for is a more effective extraction device to get people's money in small donations, and at some point they connect them. Well, this is a reimagining and a completely new way for someone to run a primary process. What we know at Americans Elect, even as millions of people have come to our website excited about this idea, on the anticipation that there can be an alternative on the ballot next year. And one of the things they're signing on to is the idea that, wait a minute, a Republican could run with a Democrat in this race, or an independent could run with a Democrat, or independent could run with a Republican, or a Republican with a Democrat. I can do that all day. There's only so many constructs. But they are open to the idea that the 3 or 4 choices that they are winnowed down to before a ballot is cast is actually not all that has to happen. That's not all that has to be. And technology and the real barrier to entry, ballot access, which Americans Elect is taking care of forcefully across the country, once we take those barriers out, it allows for great men and women to actually consider and step forward and think about running for president in this cycle. One of the things we've talked about numbers, there's no number that's more powerful than 81% of the American people absolutely don't trust government right now. It has not looked like this at any time since these two gentlemen who run presidential campaigns have been running them. So the volatility that we're talking about, Americans elect is actually replacing with what we think is just a beacon of hope, a process, a second way for people to connect to so that they can actually drive the issues to the top of the pile on americanselect.org, and that their choice, the person that they support or the ticket that they support, a nonpartisan ticket, people from two different parties running together, focusing on the issues, will actually be on the ballot in 2012. And I guess the last thing that I would say is that efforts like the one that Mark McKinnon founded, No Labels and Ruckus and a lot of other organizations around the country are gathering points for all this energy. And all of them are gathering around the idea that we can do this debate and this conversation a lot better, that we can have better candidates, that the process can be more connected to the American people, and that people can directly nominate the people who they think are going to be the best, without Iowa and New Hampshire, all due respect to the state that I lived next to for many, many years, being the only deciding factor. So americanselect.org is here, it's real, and at this point millions of people have come to it, and it's actually kind of fun to be in New York and Washington and realize that Americans around the country, in Kansas where we've gathered our signatures, or in Nevada, actually know more about this movement than some of the folks in Washington, because then you actually have a chance to win in the end.
Tad, you, as I mentioned in the introduction, Tad worked for had a couple clients last year. One, Lincoln Chafee, the current governor of Rhode Island.
Right.
Your other client, I think you told me he's in the audience.
Elliot Cutler, who's right here in the front row, yeah.
Yeah.
He should be the governor of Maine, but hopefully will be someday.
But you've seen this happen. You saw in both Maine, nearly in Maine, certainly in Rhode Island, an independent candidate, a third-party candidate, actually win the race. Not just be a factor like Ross Perot, but actually, or John Anderson, but actually win. Based upon that experience, and also your experience with the Gore campaign and the Kerry campaign and countless others, what's your take on Americans Elect and this broader frustration with how we're choosing the president, how the two parties are not working according to most Americans?
Well, my take is that I've been working on political campaigns here in the United States for 31 years, and I've never seen the mood of the electorate like it is today. More angry, more frustrated, more anxiety being expressed. I'm here this semester offering a study group about American political consultants who work in foreign campaigns. And I'm talking about places like Bolivia and Colombia and Honduras and other countries where I've worked for a long time. And when you go into a place like that and the wrong track is in 90, you know, and the right track is in single digits, you can understand why, because of the depth of poverty and all the challenges that people confront in their lives. But to see now here in the United States of America, the mood looking like the mood that we would see in objective research in a third world country is really startling. Last year, when I saw two campaigns up close here in New England, one in Rhode Island for governor, the other in Maine, it was really a remarkable experience. Link Chafee, who, by the way, I worked against when I worked for Sheldon Whitehouse in 2006 in the Senate race. He was a Republican then, and we were trying to get back control of the Senate for our party. But who I worked for last year when he left the Republican Party and became an independent. He was my kind of Republican. He was the only one who voted against the Iraq War. He opposed President Bush's economic policies. I always thought a lot of him in terms of where he stood on issues. But when he announced for governor, he stood up and he said something that no politician, I guess in their right mind, would ever say. He announced he was going to raise taxes because he felt that the only way to solve the budget crisis in Rhode Island was to expand the scope of the sales tax to include items like clothing and food that were not subject to tax. And what it really represented was something that he, and I think his father before him, stood for a long time, telling the truth to people. His father had lost the governorship in Rhode Island in 1968 because he said before the election that the state needed an income tax. He, after he lost re-election as governor, the guy who beat him 6 months later decided that, yes, the state did need an income tax even though he ran against it. And I think that kind of courage cut through. But even more remarkably than someone like Link Chafee, who had been a United States Senator, whose father had been the governor, who came from a beloved family and political tradition in the state and was able to win with 36% of the vote, what I found more remarkable was the campaign that Elliot Cutler ran for governor in Maine, someone who was unknown, who had never run for office before, who I think all the political prognosticators would have said didn't really have a chance to win, and who came within a whisker of winning election in a campaign that was totally positive, no negative advertising, and a campaign that existed pretty much at the grassroots, that reached out to people through social networking tools like Facebook, his continual blogging, an effort to pull people in, and somebody who stood up from the first ad that we did and said, listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, it's going to be tough, okay? And laid out the problems that the state confronted. The incredible audience that came to that, and I think that audience is present not just in the state of Maine or in the state of Rhode Island, I think that audience is present everywhere in America. If you read the Washington Post poll, you know, this weekend, you will see it reflected throughout the numbers. So listen, I think there's a crowd ready to come in. It's looking for an alternative, and if a real alternative is provided, I think that alternative could very quickly become a very big part of the equation.
Mark mentioned a couple of the arguments that are often tossed out against, you know, we've never elected a third-party candidate, that sort of thing. I guess, you know, one question I have when I look at this is, even if we could say, all right, I'm confident Elliot or Khalil and your colleagues at the American Select are going to get everybody on the ballot, or you get on the ballot of every state. Who's the type of candidate? Mark mentioned all these great Americans who could be great presidents, or certainly think in their own minds they could be great presidents. Who are the types of people you think might step up and actually put their name forward, or have their name put forward at this nominating convention? Because it strikes me that even if you have this vehicle, you still got to have a driver, and that's, you know, that driver is pretty key.
Sure. Well, just off the top of my head, I'll tell you the types of people.
Yeah, types. I'm not going to ask for specifics.
Christy Whitman, John Huntsman, if he doesn't win the nomination, Chuck Hagel, Bob Kerrey, Condi Rice, Tom Brokaw, Joe Lieberman, Evan Bayh, John Chambers.
Those are all good people.
Those kinds of people.
Yeah.
But what about the fact that, you know, the primaries are times when you can go out and make mistakes and right your ship. And we've seen with Rick Perry what happens when somebody jumps into a race because there are some people out there who think that good candidate without having been kind of tested in the way a long primary season does for a candidate. I mean, how can a candidate, and especially a candidate who hasn't done this before, sort of just walk in to a Category 5 storm?
Well, I think that, there may be a number of candidates who've been through a bunch of Category 5 storms that show up, like John Huntsman or others who've run and got bounced out of the primary process. The other thing is that, you know, I think there'll be some interesting, capable individuals that may have different kinds of skill sets than what we're used to seeing, but that's what people are looking for. And I think that there'll be plenty of time, even though it starts late, for these candidates to be tried and tested through this general election process, even though it's very compressed. You know, not everybody's Rick Perry, and thank God.
You know, Mark, I would add to that. As the process as it lays out, people can become candidates and/or individuals can draft people starting in December. So between December and April, as we've seen over this last several months, that's a lifetime. Americans elect, and one of the significant factors about it is that it is an open competition. It is an opportunity for several people to step forward, craft their ideas, gather their support at americanselect.org and in the states. But I think powerfully, it's an opportunity for them to actually consider running a general election strategy because they are not tethered to the early
And once they're
primary
nominated,
states.
there's a whole campaigning process. It's pretty deliberative that they'll have to go through as well, that I think will be very rigorous and prepare them. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they will be thrown into it. And it'll be I think it'll be a firestorm of attention, and it will test them, and who knows, maybe they'll melt, but we'll see. But I think it's the sort of thing that people are really hungry for. And it could be somebody like a Joe Lieberman. I mean, Joe Lieberman's been through the fires a lot. By the way, can I mention one other thing I want to mention that you said, which is the role of the party. I just think the role of the parties is completely eroded. I think it's almost insignificant. I mean, people have this note, and it's so antiquated and outdated in terms of what the parties actually do for getting somebody elected. I mean, with media and technology today, it's just it's not that relevant.
And it causes campaigns to lose control of their message.
Right.
Because now you have these outside players who are coming in, frankly, with more resources than campaigns have, deciding what the message is going to be.
That's exactly.
And really hard.
Yeah.
To deliver a message.
Yeah, that's a great point.
One other issue I wanted the panel to address before inviting the audience to join us, is Karen mentioned the 1980 and the 1992 presidential races. Both of those featured strong third-party candidacies. Maybe not so much in 1980, but arguably in 1992, affecting the outcome. We also saw it in 2000 with Ralph Nader's bid. Didn't have a huge impact around the country as far as total number of votes, but certainly
We could have used
you
97,000
could have
more
used
votes in
some votes in
Florida, I'll tell you
Florida.
that.
You could have used some votes in Florida. So we've seen a couple times third-party candidates impact the race, but maybe not in the way those candidates desire.
Right.
Maybe to Khalil, what do you say to folks who say, maybe a disaffected progressive who says, I wish the president had done something differently, that you do something that through this vehicle he ends up losing because those voters get peeled away, or similarly to a Republican who saw in 1992 Bill Clinton get elected because Ross Perot peeled a bunch of Republican-leaning votes away.
I think Tad will have a lot to say about that because he's actually done it. But I would say that one of the things that will be significantly different is if the president decided to reach across the aisle and choose someone to run with him from another party, a Republican, which would allow him in this particular environment to unite people around the issues, or as people who are coming to Americans elect in the millions, to pick a president over the party affiliation in this year. And if there was a year to do this, it's this year because it is a change election by every standard. The other thing is that people are looking for authentic leadership and someone to actually talk about the issues that mean something to them, their jobs, what are we going to do post-Iraq, how are we going to deal with Afghanistan. The primary process, and there's nothing more significant than the news that we're seeing today, is not leading us toward a conversation about those things. Right. So several weeks before the supercommittee is meeting, people have actually, their senses are telling them that might not go as well as we'd like it to, and that there needs to be something else. The opportunity between December and June, when we have our convention, AmericansElect.org, for someone to run authentically and talk about the issues that really matter, is a sea change. And I think, Tad, you are running these campaigns, so you know better than almost anyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, could this really happen, I guess, is the question?
Yeah.
I think it could happen, but there's going to be stages to it. And, the first stage is, they're removing these procedural obstacles. I think that's a big impediment that's being taken away. I think the money, the Supreme Court, frankly, ironically, may have taken away the money problem, because now suddenly the money can come into this effort from all kinds of places in all kinds of ways. Okay, so that's very interesting. We don't quite understand the way that goes. And I think what happens in these things is there are several moments. Okay, and really these campaigns they're about moments. Usually we think about debates being big moments, but there's a moment when they step on stage. I was the campaign manager for Lloyd Bentsen in 1988 in the vice presidential campaign, and I remember the day Quayle got picked and he stepped on stage. It was a bad day, and yet I remember last time, it was a bad day for them. It was a good day for us, because he wasn't quite ready to step on that stage. But when Sarah Palin gave her speech after McCain picked her, I remember thinking as a Democrat, this is going to be really tough.
Yeah, she knocked it out of the park.
She absolutely knocked it out of the park. She was very good. Now the question is, can you keep building on that? Or when the scrutiny comes, do they fall down? Can a ticket be put together that could attract enough support to put them on the stage of debates? Because you get on the stage of debate, and I've seen this not just here in the United States, but working across the world, all bets are off when you get on the stage of debate.
We've seen it with Herman Cain, the guy who came from essentially
Sure.
nowhere,
And it's
who's leading the polls right now.
It's happening
right now. And it's a 15% threshold, and I think it's highly likely the American Select ticket would pass that threshold. But to your question about half the people I talk to who have a concern about it say, oh, this is going to hurt Obama. The other half say it's going to hurt whoever the Republican nominee is. And my answer is, well, yeah, it's going to hurt them both because they're going to be president, first of all. Second of all, and if they're not, I mean, it depends on the ticket, but my God, this is a democracy. And if you're telling me that more voice and more choice is a bad thing, then you should move somewhere else. And the other thing is, I think also it's important that no matter what happens, it's going to be a deal. It may be a big deal. It may be not a big deal, but it's going to be a deal. And I think it's going to ultimately change the way we do elections in America, because this process is reimagining a democracy. It's using the internet. It's using the technology that we've got. And it's going to be a good thing. It's having a good impact on the system. It's going to create a new debate and a new dialogue. And whatever happens, like I said, I think if it's the right ticket, they'll win. At the very least, it will force either the Democrats or the Republicans or both to engage in a dialogue that this unity ticket has begun and put on the table, which I think is going to be important. So whether it wins or not, I think it will change the nature of the dialogue in a positive way.
Elliot Cutler has proved positive that he's on the board of directors of Americans Elect after almost winning a campaign that you ran, Tad. Going around right now all over Maine to communities, the community of people who came to his particular race didn't dissipate, they didn't disappear. They actually are hardened around the idea that we don't have to do things in the old model. Those people all over the country are coming to AmericansElect.org in numbers, 350,000 Facebook fans coming to our site in a little over a couple of weeks, thousands of people who are manning grassroots networks, holding meetups and introducing their friends to this idea, waiting for and anticipating the moment where they can actually directly put the candidate forward. That, for them, is going to be an extraordinary moment.
But it does seem like modern technology, it does provide all kinds of avenues for the voters to find the candidate. But then in a close race, the candidate also has to go out and find the voters, as the Bush campaign did in 2004 with micro-targeting and just an extraordinary ground operation. So how does a candidate come in that late and do that sort of thing?
Well, the Bush campaign really refined the micro-targeting in 2004 because they didn't have 50% of the electorate that was either liked the president or supported his policies. So it had to really go out and find them. If this ticket happens, well, first of all, as one of the people responsible for spending 90% of the money in a presidential campaign, I can tell you about 89% of it's wasted. And the real power...
Oh, please, don't say that.
The power of people get their information about presidential elections really not from advertising. It helps drive the narrative around the edges, but it's not like they're persuaded by political advertising. This is decided by you all who are covering this, and we'll pay. When this happens, it's going to be an extraordinary event. It will get a ton of attention, and there's no amount of money that will make up for the kind of ballast that will create for this ticket. And then all the people who support it will fund it. But I'm quite confident that this ticket will have all the money it needs. I don't think money or funding is going to be an issue because I think it's going to be such an extraordinarily unique proposition, and people will be paying. And by the way, people will be paying a lot of attention to this election. So it's not like you have to micro-target them. They're going to find it. People are paying attention to this election. It's not like they're ignoring it, so they're going to be looking very carefully at what the options are, and you all will be carrying a lot of that message. So it'll be incumbent on the tickets and the candidates to create an authentic and credible dialogue through your channel.
Yeah,
really.
and can I say, Khalil referenced this at the beginning, and I just want to reiterate and say I agree with this, that in 2000 and 2004, two campaigns that we both worked on, the world today in 2012 is totally different. Okay, it's not, in 2004, you couldn't do what you can do today in terms of, social networking and reaching out to people and, and really letting them come to you as opposed to you having to go out and find them. I think that's the big difference. And they will find you if you show up in the right space. I've always believed that there's this, place called the voter zone, and the voter zone is where the voters are. And sometimes you sit in a focus group and, they'll start talking about, I remember Harris Walford's special election when he was elected, the Senate in Pennsylvania, they had these focus groups and people would go in and said, things around here, pretty good, but we could really use some health care. Well, what about jobs? Well, we don't have a job, but I really wish I had some health care. Well, what about the environment? I'm worried about the environment because if I get sick, I don't have health care. And afterwards he said, maybe this is about health care, And it turns out even though Thornburg was 54 points ahead, he lost the Senate race by 10 points because the voter zone was there. And, in this voter zone right now, let me tell you something, it is a hot place, and if you go and find it and you get in it with them and you talk to them and let them talk to you, you're going to be shocked how quickly this thing can move. I think it's going to go like a hot knife through butter if the right circumstances come up.
Let me ask maybe Khalil the last question, then we'll invite the audience. How are you, over the next several months, going to find that voter zone and tell people that this exists? We sometimes here at the IOP live in a little bit of a bubble. When I talk to my friends back in Kentucky about politics, and sometimes they look at me like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of that group, or I've never heard of that person. And I forget that this is not the real world here. So how obviously you're coming to the IOP, you're going around the country. What are some of the steps that y'all are taking over the next couple of months to tell the story, to try to reach those disaffected voters who are in the voter zone, to maybe overcome the obstacles that have prevented other third-party movements or candidates from ultimately winning the race?
Well, the most important thing for Americans Elect as in just an operational imperative is getting on the ballot in all 50 states. And getting on as many states as possible in 2011, which you can get on 28 states, and we will be. And
28 is the magic.
28 is the magic number this year.
And you're going to go 28 for 28
next year. And in talking to Mark and talking to others who have done this a lot longer than I have, they argue that candidates will have a deep understanding of the opportunity if they don't have to go out and get ballot access. So no longer is this the realm of somebody who has $1 billion and therefore $25 million to allocate to ballot access. Americans Elect is doing that. The second thing is a sustained and aggressive outreach to people like Karen in places like New York and Washington, but as important, in those states where we're getting on the ballot. We talk to reporters and in communities every single day to be able to make this relevant and real for people. What we have found as we've been going out through our grassroots network and through our efforts to share this with people through the press is that people were yearning for something. They couldn't name Americans Elect but at the beginning, but they are really attracted and compelled to come to the idea that they're going to be able to go beyond the 3 or 4 choices that it's been winnowed down to right now. And so as we're telling that story, again, folks like Tad and Mark tell us that the political calendar will firm up in January and February. We'll know who's on the Republican side. We already know who's on the Democratic side. And at that time, if the polls that we've seen and the polls that Americans Elect has done are true indicators, and at that point the website experience is completely well thought through and deployed, that is the opportunity for another candidate to emerge. And in so many ways, you'll have a lot of things coming together at the same time. Ballot access, a website where people can congregate and convene around this idea and nominate someone for president and or support someone, a grassroots network where they can work and call people and email every single day, and our sustained efforts to tell these stories in every place we possibly can between now and February.
Great. Well, now's the time to invite the audience to come up. We have microphones, 2 on the floor, 2 in the loge in the boxes. We have some ground rules here at the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. They're simple, though. First, if you ask a question, please identify yourself, and if you have a Harvard affiliation, tell us that. Second is that a question is a question. It is not a speech followed by, do you agree? It's a concise, sometimes witty, hopefully intelligible question that can be directed at either of the panel as a whole or as an individual, and it ends in a question mark. So with that, we'll start over in this microphone. We'll just kind of work our way around. For those who want to ask questions, note the lengths of the lines of the different microphones, because sometimes you might get to ask your question more quickly.
Marvin Brands from Divinity School. I think this question is mostly for Mark McKinnon, and that is, what would you think of renaming, say, the independent movement or the independent party, naming it the Revolutionary Party? I'm serious. Because it's a highly charged word. At one time it would have been a negative. Now I'm not so sure of that. It may be something that people are ready for. And if they are, I think it would put a smile on Karl Marx's face.
Well, I think we're in the kind of political environment that we're in. Anything is possible, and I think that there's a number of I think there's a constituency out there actually for the idea of revolution. I still think we're at a point where that idea probably scares a lot of people as well, but it is, as I said, it's uncharted water, and we don't know. And I mean, it could be that people want to take the dialogue that far. They think that that's in part sort of what Occupy Wall Street's about. I mean, it's in some ways about a revolution. Oh yeah, that's a clear message.
Real
Sure. Grab the pitchforks.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ross Fenton, a freshman at the college. My question is, how would an independent candidate transition to his role as president with both parties so polarized? How would they go about changing the political system, getting things done, if you have very liberal Democrats, very conservative Republicans that they have to work with in Congress?
Yeah, sort of the Robert Redford question. All right, now what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, whoever wins is going to have a mandate, and it won't. I mean, there's always a mandate, and it depends on how you handle that mandate, how long it lasts. But when you're elected president, you have a window of time in which people have voted you to do something, and you have a window of opportunity to do that. And so I don't know precisely what this unity ticket would campaign on, but I'll just take a shot at it to say that this unity ticket would likely say we have big challenges today, and the problem with the system right now is that it's so paralyzed by hyperpartisanship that you've got one side saying we refuse to raise revenue, and you've got another side saying we refuse to reform entitlements, and this ticket's going to run and saying we need to do a little bit of both. You know, the Republicans say that, the Democrats will say it. As a unity ticket, we think we're acknowledging the obvious. We think this is what a vast majority of Americans know we have to do, and there has to be some shared sacrifice, and that would be the mandate. And then once you're elected that way those members of Congress who've been so scared of their shadows for so long because of these interest groups will say, well, wait a minute. You know, 60% of the country just elected this ticket that said this is what we ought to do, so we better do it or next time we might not get elected. So that's how I think it'll work.
Ted, how's it working in Rhode Island?
Yeah,
I think that might be somewhat illuminative.
Sure. I think what Governor Chafee's trying to do now in Rhode Island is to take Democrats and Republicans and put them into government. I mean, he's taken two, for example, former Democratic lieutenant governors of the state and put them into his cabinet. One, the director of administration, was probably the second most powerful position in the state. He took a woman who was almost elected a Republican Secretary of State in the last election, put her into the cabinet as independents. So I think that's where it begins, by actually taking people from both parties, putting them into cabinet offices, and putting them throughout the government. And then it comes down to, I think, an agreed-upon agenda that you're going to seek to lead into law, and using the bully pulpit of the presidency and all the power that is inherent in it to try to achieve those legislative victories. And if you can muster public opinion and, you know, get it behind you, I think you make it clear to legislators that, you know, unless this legislation is passed, then we would, you know, try to organize people who are going to run the next election for the House of Representatives in every seat and for the open Senate seats as well to achieve these legislative victories. That message, I think, will be heard.
For the million people who come to Americans Elect website, or 1.9 million who signed the petitions around the country, they are completely impatient with a lack of governance in Washington right now. And so they, in building numbers, who will be coming to the convention in June and supporting candidates throughout the process, they are looking for the people that Mark just talked about to come and not be afraid of the punishment or being primaried or what have you, but actually for someone to deal with the issues that they think are important. Again, a news day like today teaches us that those issues are pretty far from the main conversation that we see on television or read every day.
One thing, though, that as I was listening, though it does strike me that whoever would run, assuming this could happen, would in fact have to tell people, you know, what they would do, as opposed to I'm here to fix the process, because that was Barack Obama's message, that was to some degree George Bush's message, it was even Bill Clinton's message. And I think one thing people have lost is any kind of faith that somebody can come to Washington and fix the process, and thereby good outcomes will come. I do think that people are anxious to have a candidate tell them what the outcome would be.
Right. You know, one of the things we don't see as much in our politics, but I've seen a lot working in Europe particularly, is the role that manifestos play and programs of government where parties actually get together, spend a lot of time thinking about what they'll do in government, and then put it out in writing before the election. And, you know, we haven't seen a lot of that in our politics. Platforms usually get discarded after the convention. But, you know, I think if that actually comes forward with a program of government, for example, which is typical in the European system, you know, we're particularly in a coalition when different parties come together to form government, that program of government, I think, will become operational, you know, if someone is elected under this system.
Great question. Yes, up here.
Thanks very much. I think you've really successfully
Could you identify yourself?
Sorry, my name's Joel Brownald. I'm a graduate student here at Kennedy. I'm from the UK, which is interesting because it seems like you've pulled a page out of Simon Cowell's book of how to get more votes. And he's managed more than any political consultant I've met to make people vote. But I think that you haven't taken enough out of him. You're still looking to appeal to the journalists in Washington and New York. And surely you should be looking to LA. The way that Simon Cowell did it is that he made the X Factor a common part of your life. You saw it every week. There were promos every day. And if this is to be more than a fad, why not get Bravo to make a reality TV show around the process? I'm being serious. Appeal to people. That's how you make sure that it's not just, I clicked like and that's my collectivism and now I did my job. Make this an entire process. Don't appeal to the Stanton hacks who are going to think that you're a joke. Go directly to it. And my challenge to you is, why do the first bit where you're going to change the ballot access and don't do the second bit where politics has moved? The Republican debates are entertainment, they're nothing else. And if that's the case, why not also look at yourselves as we can be just as entertaining but far more real for you?
That's a great question, and without revealing some proprietary discussions and confidences, there's actually been some discussions about that. not just internally, but external people who've come to the organization to suggest precisely the sort of thing that you're talking about.
Don't let the boring blue tie fool you. My colleagues are out here laughing because they agree with Mark. There is a fundamental decision, and millions of people are coming to the table deciding that the idea of seeing a candidate just suffer through and walk through New Hampshire in the cold as being the only thing they have to do to be legitimate for the presidency, that's over. And if we decide that that's over, and we decide that we see that millions of people are coming to the idea that putting the power in their hands, the ability to shape the rules, the ability to shape the issues that people are going to deal with, and the ability to directly support or draft a candidate in this cycle, that's happening right now. And so what we love is that on the 135 campuses across the country where we have chapters of Americans Elect, that people who are just coming into the political system are absolutely untethered to the ideas that what I, in my 40s might think is the right thing to do. They are making their decisions based on what their current reality is. They get information in all different ways, and they deliver it to their friends and families in ways that we can only imagine. So thinking of this as a top-down, we're going to come up with the smartest idea in the room initiative, or an initiative that won't eventually it'll be eventually driven by the creativity of a candidate. It's a decision that not only are they going to be on this nominating ballot in a different way, but they're going to run a completely different campaign from anything we've ever seen. That's the decision right now that millions of people have already made.
It's a great point, a great observation, and when you step back and think about the way we do politics, it's incredibly conventional. And and the extent to which we haven't embraced technology and really used it to flatten things. And that's why when I first heard about this idea, it made me think about, what if we were in control and we just landed here from Mars and looked at the challenges that we face, if we could redo it all, how would we do it? We'd probably scrap a lot of what's been gone before. And we just do it because we've been doing it for 200 years. But if we could just start over today and reimagine democracy, the sorts of things you're talking about are exactly the kind of things I think that people would consider.
In the front here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jacob Morello, a freshman here at the college. And so in America, we have this beautiful system called the Electoral College, which elects our president. And I think it's worth examining if this movement is as big of a deal as it certainly could be. And it does draw those votes away from the Republican and Democratic tickets. Then it may result in a situation where no candidate receives a majority of the votes, in which case it would then go to the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Republicans, in which case wouldn't this serve as actually a detriment to President Obama's re-election campaign and actually really help the conservative ticket? Could you discuss that?
We do presentations for Republicans who are certain that Mr. Romney's campaign is in trouble based on this, and others who think that President Obama's campaign is in trouble because of this. And no one who has joined or participates in the organization knows who the candidate is going to be or has an agenda that's around that. They actually want to add more voice and choice to the process and make people's vote, which don't mean anything beyond the early primary states, actually mean something. One of the things that's in our rules, Americans Elect doesn't look to spoil an election. We are a two-party country, and we're Democrats, Republicans, and Independents who've come together for this mission. If our candidate comes in third and there's no hope of winning, we'll actually do something that's historic. We'll have a second convention in the general election, end of the general election, and and when the Electoral College would meet, to have the electors directed to go one way or the other based on what the delegates at Americans Elect want. Now, that kind of direct democracy at that particular point would mean that the Republican and Democratic candidates would end up fighting after the election for this gigantic middle, for these people who have wanted to vote one way or the other but have not been satisfied by what they've seen. That's one of the things that that people who have been thinking about, and there are thousands at this point, thinking about Americans Elect, are dreaming of. Not just looking at the conventional way we're doing things, but imagining in a way that we can make this much more direct and much more immediate for someone like you who is excited about casting their vote but disappointed in the leadership they're seeing.
Not going to spoil it, going to boil it. But that's a very good question. Thanks.
That is a great question.
And I guess there's also, I mean, we could have a whole nother forum discussion, although maybe not as many people would come on the whole Electoral College and some of the reform efforts that are out there, and we use the reform broadly, so Pennsylvania as well as the National Popular Vote movement. Yes?
My name is Andrew Mack. I'm also at the college, and I'm wondering about how having more independence in Washington would help the deadlock that I think so many people in the American public are really upset about. I can't see that being an issue, and I'm wondering if you guys would be interested in commenting on that.
Well, I think if you have a president who doesn't come through the two-party system, it's going to shake things up, big time, really big time, because that president will not be beholden to a whole series of interests, which both parties represent right now. So, now as to having more, members of the legislature, the House and Senate, who are elected, outside the party system, I think that's going to depend on, their political persuasion, whether they're elected as, more conservative members of Congress, more progressive members of Congress. They're going to want, I worked for Bernie Sanders for many years, but he's always caucused with the Democrats, he just, because he simply didn't have a home on the other side. And yet, particularly when he was in the House, he worked with Republicans on lots of legislation and got lots of things done with people who ideologically he may not seem to have fit with, but on a very practical basis on certain issues like home heating assistance for fuel oil in Vermont were really important to his constituents, and he found common ground with people in the Republican caucus. So I think if this happens at the presidential level, and I guess what we're all saying is, listen, with the numbers the way they are right now, this is something we should look at, and it's a real possibility. The President of the United States is the only candidate that we elect in our system who's actually voted for by all the people of this country. And listen, sometimes you can get elected president. Abraham Lincoln got elected president with a lot less than 50% of the vote, okay, in 1860, So, can you come and do extraordinary things without, 50% of the vote or more? I think you certainly can with all of that authority of the presidency.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that an independent president could be elected under the Electoral College system?
Well, I mean, you sort of have to look at this on a state-by-state basis. And I mean, can somebody come in and win 270 electoral votes? The truth is that most of the states, there's only two, Maine and Nebraska, that award electoral votes on a congressional district basis and not winner take all on a plurality basis. So can someone with 35 or 36 or 37% of the vote consistently across the board, particularly in the right set of states, targeted states, can they accumulate 270 electoral votes under the right circumstances? I think it's a definite possibility, yes.
Well, adding to that point, President Clinton got 42% of the vote in that election. There's some magic that happens at about 38%.
Right.
The step function of electoral votes is way above the percentage that you get in the popular vote.
In fact, Clinton never did get 50.
Yeah.
No.
But I guess going back to his question about the Electoral College, I mean, I've seen some analyses over the last couple of days of the states that are solidly Republican and solidly Democratic, and even given the electorate's mood, I struggle to figure out would any of these states actually, would California really move out of the Democratic column? And if it doesn't, it's 50-something electoral votes that President Obama is going to get. And maybe New York could move. I could see that one as maybe being more interesting. But when you start adding these up, I think the Electoral College probably does pose a really big hurdle to somebody actually winning a majority, given the winner-take-all nature of most.
The only counter evidence that Americans Elect can give is what we've done over the last several months. We've gotten 1.6 million signatures, 10% of the voting population, over 10% actually, the voting population in California, to sign on the notion of an alternative. And the thing that is driving people to the website right now is pick a party, pick a president, not
Right.
a party. They are looking for someone to run authentically. And all of the old models right now are falling away. And their trust in what the leaders are serving them up right now as they run through the Democratic process and through the Republican process, it's not there as strongly as it was before. So.
And California did elect a movie star. Mark knows something about that. Yes.
Hi, my name is Leora Falk. I'm a first-year MPP student here. And I have a question about the demographics of the people who are participating on Americans Elect Online. When I filled out the survey, I found time and time again you have a map that shows how other people are voting, and it looks like the whole country is always choosing the most liberal or second most liberal option, traditionally liberal. And I thought, oh, well, that makes sense. I heard about Americans Elect on the Colbert Report. But
you saw this gentleman right here, Elliot Ackerman, on the Colbert.
But I was just wondering, do you see this as a problem? And if so, how are you going to expand it past that political entrenchment?
Let me take the first shot if I may.
Sure.
That's a great question. My view is that it's attracting people who are disenfranchised, and right now, the preponderance of those people who are center and center-left, who are not happy with the administration, or Obama particularly, the center and center-right people who will be attracted to the site right now are looking at the Republican primaries.
Right.
I mean, that's where their attention is right now. And they're going to wait for that to resolve itself, but when it does, I don't care who the nominee is, there's going to be a lot of those people dissatisfied with that nominee, and that's when they're going to turn and say, what are my other options? So at that point, I think it balances itself out.
But isn't it also true that people who are not terribly partisan are also late deciders? I mean, they tune in later to politics.
Absolutely.
And that women traditionally tune in late. So how do you get those people engaged in your time frame when it may be October before some of them are going, wait, I wish I had something else?
If your first biggest national exposure is in the New York Times with Tom Friedman, you're going to tilt left for a little bit. And as Mark says, it takes a while for the others to catch up. But if you look under the hood, and Josh Levine, who was former CTO of E-Trade and is building this infrastructure, has been working on how we reach out to people all over the country. If you look under the hood and you look at the 350,000 people who've come to the site through Facebook, most of those were actually right-leaning women. What happens is there's an early adopter and they look one way. But as we go further into the political calendar, as Mark explains, what you're finding is people, and this is what our polling showed at the beginning, people who have been voting for a long time, they've been in the system, and they tend to be those kind of Pennsylvania voters that you've been hunting for your whole life. They're sort of people whose families are either in unions, they may be conservative on some issues, but they're live and let live on others, and they're not finding themselves quite moored to the current party system because the parties right now are too extreme. Those are the people who are coming, and they're the people who are already banking online. They're already doing other things online, and they are considering this as the second wave. And that's where we're seeing a diversity of people all over the country. And the argument for them is very simple. The fact that it's 3 choices right now and there's no vote that's been cast is not satisfying to them. The idea that they can actually nominate, shape a process where they can actually be proud of the person who comes through it is not satisfying. So we're seeing those numbers change right now, and the population of people who are participating significantly changed to look like what you would expect. We're a center-right country, for lack of a way of putting it.
Josh? Is there anything else you want to add to that?
If I could maybe ask a follow-up about the profile of the folks who are coming to the website. And I realize that it might be skewed a little bit by the states that you're able to go in right now to get on the ballot, because you're going to probably get more publicity in some states that you can do that now. But are you noticing, when you factor that in, are you noticing any geographic trends that might show that this movement has particular strength in a certain part of the country, or maybe in certain swing states but not other swing states, or is it pretty uniform across the country once you control for some of those some of the publicity hits or ballot access influences.
Well, you see, you saw an early rush from Washington to New York because the media markets there are so intense.
Yeah.
And then you saw another rush because we had so many people, thousands of people on the ground gathering signatures in California. But I think what's interesting for us as we look at it is that all of those models that we're talking about actually don't work. Your instinct would tell you that the early adopters, left-leaning, would be the people who would come to the site. That's not actually who's represented in our grassroots network. It's actually people of all different stripes coming to that particular activity. Your other instinct would say that young people are sort of more predisposed to do this. The ones who are solidly coming to the website now in numbers are people, again, who've been participating in the system for a long time, the kind of people who voted for you in Kentucky, who they don't really deal with I won't say any expletive on the stage here, but they don't deal with the stuff that they're hearing coming from some of the morning shows.
They
actually want it plain, they want it straight, and they're looking for the opportunity to have somebody who is authentic come to the table.
Yeah.
And those people are, as they're coming into awareness about they can't name 50 state ballot access, but they know when a process is serious and credible, it's going to lead to a credible result.
Yeah.
Therefore, they'll participate, and that's what we're seeing happen right now.
So back up here in the loge.
Hi, my name's Alex. I don't have any affiliation here. I was really excited when I came across your site, but pretty soon after getting to answer the questions, the concern that I felt was that a lot of the questions proposed, only have middle-of-the-road answers, and I'm sorry, this is not taking the form of a proper question, but as politics becomes less and less connected to the blood and sweat of actually drafting legislation and getting things enacted the way you need it, because there's a huge gap between getting somebody like Obama elected and what actually happens when they write the rules for Barney Frank. Then I'm concerned that we're not just sort of giving this up to the businesses and the other people who have lots and lots of money to hire lobbyists. And I wonder if by making it just going online and clicking a box and there's less required from people, whether you think that there's still going to be a chance for those average real people to be represented when things like legislation get written or when rules get written. And it's not just going to be
sure. I think that's a great observation, a legitimate concern, and my response would be that nobody at Americans Elect thinks they have all the answers, and that they're really hoping that the community will weigh in and will advise on how to make it better and how to change it. And if you think it should be expanded or the questions should be different, there are lots of a number of people here who represent the organization that I'm sure would love to talk to you if you can get their name or info, and love to get your ideas about how to improve it.
Well, it's happening now. We have, when you went on the site, it was actually a process of you just naming what the issues are that you think are the most important. Now, seated throughout the website are people who are in the political process, people who are senators, governors, and others. Their voting issues and priorities are there, and you're sort of matched up with those people. But what's been really exciting is a process that we call Shape the Debate, that at this particular point, thousands of questions have been submitted, and I don't know if you're familiar with the dig, but you're the one, and people who are like you are the ones who can actually drive the questions to the top.
Why don't you explain what the dig is for the list?
The dig is just a website which allows people to rank order things that they care about, stories, and the stories that are the most popular and the ideas that are most salient are the ones that end up at the top. For us, we call that, we don't have a platform of issues, we have a platform of questions. It will be the delegates who actually define what the debate is that candidates will have. They have to actually answer the questions that the American people, any registered voter in America, can be a delegate at Americans Elect. The questions that they're going to have to answer to be eligible. We've just found thousands of people coming to the process focused on shaping that debate, and it's better than many of the questions that you're seeing in the current debates going on right now, of which there are many.
Broad actually affecting the way legislation's made. Yeah,
right, exactly.
Well, I think you got. I mean, I guess this is for this purpose. But do you have plans? I think of ramping of. Let's say it's successful. have you given thought to how the new president might utilize a tool like this to open it up, to drive legislation, to implement the mandate, to actually impact change, because winning elections isn't enough?
You know what? Oh, excuse me, Mark. Go ahead.
I'm not trying to make this job harder.
We're just trying to get the website up, for Christ's sake.
Watching the president work to re-inspire his grassroots network is an interesting process for us, because people were so committed to coming out, and they organized themselves around arguably a great man. But they lost that energy almost completely in the first year and a half. Part of it is that in politics, the technology actually isn't being used for anything but the sort of earliest wave of what it can be used for. This is a reimagination of the way we do everything, how we connect grassroots to the process, how people interact with it and shape both the rules but also the debate, and how they support and nominate a candidate. We know that that candidate, as Mark talked about earlier, is going to carry that energy into the campaign, because everything is different, right? And that it has a higher probability of moving into their governance, because they can put new coalitions together to be able to drive those issues that are languishing right now and die on the jobs bill and unfortunately aren't moving through the super committee as well as we'd like. Those issues have an opportunity to connect. And Americans Elect, I would say, is not something that's being built just for 2012. It's on the ballot in 2014 and 2016, and can be used on the state level to bring the same result that we're going to see at the national level there. That perpetual organization and people being organized in a new way is one of the key goals of Americans Elect.
Yeah, I think once you reimagine how you do elections, you can reimagine how you govern as well.
Right.
We have to make this the last question.
Oh, that's pressure. Good evening. I'm Richard Albert, a graduate of the Harvard Law School class of 2008. I'm now a constitutional law professor at Boston College Law School. Before I ask my question, I just want to say, Karen, I'm your biggest fan.
Oh, oh my goodness.
Wonderful to have a chance to see. I consider myself a pretty informed Democrat. That's a small d Democrat. I don't want to prejudice anyone listening to me. But this is the first time I've heard of this idea. It's very exciting. Congratulations for setting this up. I suspect that your challenge, though, is to saturate the national political consciousness with this very intriguing project. And I guess there are maybe 3 points of entry for that. One is directly to citizens, speak to them. One is perhaps by partnering with charismatic national politicians who have some kind of personal cachet. And third is through the media. Now, with respect to the media, I can't imagine myself seeing MSNBC or Fox News reporting on something like this credibly, precisely because they may have entrenched interests of their own. And so I guess my question is, are you concerned that perhaps the media is complicit, or disinclined is a better word, disinclined to an idea like this from the very beginning, precisely because of the entrenched interests that some might perceive that they represent? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for a great question. I think at the end of the day, while we could debate whether or not some particular platforms have a bias one way or the other, that ultimately what the press really, what feeds the beast is conflict. And something new and something different, something surprising. And I just think that, first of all, to your point, yes, a lot of people haven't heard of Americans Elect yet, but that's in large part by design. The organization really wanted to stay under the radar while they built it, got it together, put the technology together, developed their organizational thinking. They knew that there'd be a lot of interests that'll be opposed to this idea, would try and kill it in the crib, and therefore wanted to stay below the radar screen until they really kind of had, were ready to take it onto Broadway. So a lot of off-Broadway work going on. But I think that when this happens, it will be of significant enough interest that it'll be impossible to ignore, no matter what platform you're on. And now they may cover it in different ways, but I think when there's 50-state ballot access and a third-party candidacy and a unity ticket, they will not be able to ignore it.
Karen, you're here. Has the Post written about this? that much?
Not a lot, actually. But I would actually also disagree a little bit with what the media is interested in, because I think Barack Obama became a media phenomenon because I worked at Time Magazine. When we put him on the cover of the magazine, people bought the magazine.
Yeah, right.
You know, it was, and also we do go out and we do talk to people, and when you feel something working and when you feel something happening, I think we were probably a little bit late to see what it was that people saw in Herman Cain, but I don't think we get quite enough credit for actually being out there and listening to people. And
The conflict may not be exactly the right word. I mean, it's not necessarily conflict. It's something that's changing the status quo. And you're right. You guys are the early radar system on a lot of this. And I think that a lot of the interest will be because it's new and innovative and different, not just because it's conflict. I mean conflict in the sense that it's something different than the norm.
When reporters are out there and they're at political events, or they're going around the 10th diner of the morning with a candidate, and you suddenly hear people ask the candidate about this, or ask, that's, I think, when it's the voter zone.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, the experience it's hard work. These guys have run presidential campaigns, and you don't get any quarter. You have to work for it every single day. I think what part of the question you're asking is, are they just completely skeptical and dismissive when they hear about Americans elected when we talk about it? That's actually not the case. We're finding now that people are writing about this effort because they've been hearing about it in other places. And they're able to say, believe me, this presentation would have been hours at the beginning of this process. Finally kind of got it down to a manageable, pick a president, not a party, way of talking about it. But I think what Mark said earlier is very important, that the race being settled right now isn't satisfying not only for the American people, but for journalists who have to cover it every day. And the idea that there will be a real entrant, and the barrier to entry is ballot access. It's not anything else. It's not campaign consultants, money, opportunity on the stage. All of that is available. The real barrier to entry is at ballot access. Once you take that away, it allows the American people and allows candidates who think they should run to imagine that they can actually come into the system and talk authentically about what they care about. And there's a great deal of hunger for that, as we've seen in the millions of people who've already come to American Select.
Great. Well, I know we had go ahead.
Sure.
I usually demand high rates for this, but I'll give this to you for free. David Gergen on your ticket. How's that?
Oh, good. Yeah. No, actually, that's a great idea.
So we need another Harvard faculty member running for office next year. No, that's we know we have a couple more questions, but we unfortunately are closed for our time window. Those who didn't get their questions asked, I know the panel is going to stick around. You can ask them personally. Obviously, you can learn more at americanselect.org. I want to invite you to come back. We have a great series of forums coming up over the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow night, we have Donald Tsang, who's the chief executive, in other words, the administrator of Hong Kong, going to be in the forum. Wednesday night, Congressman Barney Frank's going to talk about the federal budget deficit and the role that military spending can play in getting that under control. Next Monday, the commissioner of the IRS. I know we don't love the IRS, but Doug Shulman, who's the commissioner of the IRS, is going to talk about tax reform, which will be a big issue affecting the presidential election and the congressional debate, and probably the super committee as well. And actually, the following Friday, November 18th, Newt Gingrich is going to be here in the forum to talk about why he should be president. So I want to invite you to come in, come back.
Watch out for the Gingrich boom. It's the next
it's
boom.
coming. It's coming. We timed this perfectly. We timed this
on the front
perfectly.
page last Sunday.
Yeah, the Gingrich boom. And for those of you who had friends who you think would have benefited from tonight's forum but couldn't be here tonight in person, this forum will be archived on the IOP's website and also placed on the IOP's, the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum channel on iTunes U. So there's plenty of opportunities to share this using technology. Please join me in thanking our panel for this great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you, Pat.